Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. Some AEW news I do want to get into today, and let's kick off with Friday Night Dynamite last week and the not so good ratings for Friday Night Dynamite. Now this obviously is going to generate a lot of conversation, isn't it? Everyone likes to talk about ratings. We like to talk about ratings here. I mentioned earlier, we did a video earlier today talking about Friday Night SmackDown last week was the second lowest viewership for SmackDown on Fox since they moved there in 2019. And as I always mention when we talk about ratings, whether it's for WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, whatever company, even in 2021, they still do have their importance to the product that they are presenting on television. Are they the be-all and end-all like they were in the late 90s? No. But they do certainly tell us snapshots of what the fans' reactions are to these programmings, because obviously they judge how many people tuned in live during that show. In addition to that, they matter certainly to the television networks and the advertising companies as well. That's why it's so important. That's why cable ratings, television ratings still do have an importance in reporting pro wrestling news in 2021, because you look at companies, especially companies like AEW, but certainly WWE too, they make arguably the majority of their money, certainly the money that's helped carry them through the pandemic, that's been television rights money. So that's really what made AEW profitable in its first 12 months of existence. That's what's made WWE so much money with the television rights deals they signed with NBC Universal for Monday Night Raw and NXT, and for Friday Night SmackDown with Fox. There's a lot of money still in television, so the television ratings are still important. So when it comes to AEW and Friday Night Dynamite, it's not been too pleasant reading when it comes to the post-Double or Nothing edition of Dynamite. Obviously, the post-Double or Nothing edition of Dynamite last week was on Friday from 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern Time. It featured Mark Henry's advertised Dynamite debut, plus Dustin Rhodes versus Nick Comoroto in a bull rope match main event, but it only reportedly drew 462,000 live viewers on TNT. This is according to Nielsen via PW Torch. Now, this is down 12.17% from last week's Friday Night Dynamite episode, which drew 526,000 live viewers on TNT for the Double or Nothing Go Home show. Even that was a significantly lower number for AEW Dynamite. Now, the show drew a 0.19 rating in the key 18 to 49 demographic, which would be the lowest rating in that demographic in the show's history. The previous week drew a 0.20 key demographic rating, so it was down 5%. Friday Night's Dynamite on TNT drew the lowest audience in the history of the show, down 12.17% from last week. Friday's Dynamite viewership was down 36.7% from the same week in 2020, which went head-to-head with NXT in the Wednesday night time slot. The key demo was also down 34.5% from the same week last year. Now, to compare this week's Friday Night Dynamite numbers, the Saturday Night Dynamite episode on August 22, 2020 drew 755,000 live viewers with a 0.31 key demographic rating, while the Thursday Night Dynamite episode on August 27, 2020 drew 813,000 live viewers with a 0.29 key demo rating. Last week's Friday Night Dynamite episode drew 526,000 viewers with a 0.20 rating in the key 18 to 49 demographic for the Double or Nothing Go Home episode. So, obviously, I think there's, and I don't want to be one of these people that's go, you're just trying to use excuses for AEW. If this was Monday Night Raw, if it was Friday Night SmackDown, if it was NXT and they did this terrible number, you'd be all over them, you'd be saying the product's terrible, all this kind of stuff. Look, first of all, was last week's episode of Dynamite particularly good? I would argue no, it was not great by Dynamite's high standards. If you compare it to maybe an edition of Monday Night Raw or SmackDown or whatever, it would probably be a good show. But for Dynamite standards, for whatever it's worth, I don't think it was a particularly good show last week. I have no issue saying that because I didn't think it was a very good show. I think you had, for instance, the Andrade debut, which they could have done better. I think the main event obviously didn't feel like a main event in the sense of that's not going to draw big numbers. No disrespect to Dustin Rhodes or Nick Comoroto, but it's just not. In addition, you had Double or Nothing. You would be hoping for new feuds, a reset, and we didn't really get that. We got more of, I'm not finished with you yet. It was the Pinnacle and the Inner Circle and all that kind of stuff, and it kind of just felt like, where is the progression? There didn't feel like there was any. Now, obviously, I think it's incredibly unfair to criticize Dynamite for getting low ratings and low viewership when not only are they not in their time slots that they would usually be in from 8 to 10, Eastern time. They're also on a different night, on a Friday night, which historically, even I know people will say, well, SmackDown airs on a Friday night, all that kind of stuff, but WWE, even going back to when SmackDown first went to Friday nights, which was, 2005, I think that was? When SmackDown was first moved to Fridays in 2005, I think that was when they were still on UPN, WWE didn't want to do it during that time period. Why didn't they want to do it? Because Fridays are very difficult, especially Friday nights, but Fridays in general aren't good for television. Why? Because people are busy. People, frankly, are busy on Fridays. Friday nights, people are out and about, they're socializing, it's the end of the work week, they've got plans, they're doing stuff with their friends, their families. There are some people that might want to sit down and watch some television, but for a lot of people, they don't. People busy. People have their other lives. Now, obviously, with the pandemic, over the course of the last 18 months, people actually haven't really been out and about that often, so maybe you could say you can get away with it. I guess for certain shows and stuff like SmackDown on Fox, people are going to be watching Fox anyway. That's a network television show, so maybe you can get away with it. I don't know. But you have to look at the difficulty and what Dynamite's going up against right now. They are out of their normal time slots. Instead of being 8 to 10, they're 10 to 12. They're on a different night of the week, from Wednesdays to Fridays. They have to follow SmackDown, so people would have watched 2 hours worth of pro wrestling anyway, and it's from 10 to 12, and it's on Fridays. There is just so much. There is so much that makes it, not surprising that the numbers aren't great. I think it's unfair to criticize AEW Dynamite and AEW in general for having these low ratings for these preempted shows. Frankly, it just goes to show, if anything, I feel sorry for them. I feel sorry for AEW because they're going to be preempted pretty much until July. Pretty much until they go back to live touring, they're preempted because of the NBA playoffs. And this just goes to show the importance at this point, the importance of AEW moving to TBS next year, because then it takes away all of this preemption nonsense or preemption malarkey and all this kind of stuff, because TNT is going to have NBA and NHL. And that's the situation. They need to get away from these preemptions because obviously it's been proven at this point it's bad for the product. Less people are watching. The product certainly has a feeling of, whenever a show's preempted, frankly, whenever a show's preempted, you know that whatever company it is, whether it was WWE when they would have preempted shows on the USA Network because of the dog show or whatever, or whether it was WCW because of the NBA on TNT for Nitro way back when, whenever a show's preempted, you know you're not getting the premiere show because the company itself knows this week's kind of a wash because no one's going to be watching. We'll save our good stuff for when we're back in our normal time slot. And it kind of feels like for the next month, Dynamite's got, AEW's got programming, and Dynamite, there are episodes of Dynamite, but they kind of feel a bit meaningless because they're preempted, because they're not on a Wednesday night, because they're on a Friday night in a different time slot. It all just kind of feels that, okay, let's just get this month out of the way. Once we get to July, we'll be back on track. And it's damaging to the product. It is damaging to the product because you come out of Double or Nothing with all of this momentum, all of this hype, great pay-per-view, great matches, and it kind of feels like everything's just stopped. Everything's just stopped because of these preemptions. And you do sympathize for AEW. I don't blame them for having these bad ratings. I certainly don't look at this going, see, AEW, their bubbles burst, they can't draw anymore, blah, 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 blah. Because if you think that, then obviously you just don't want to see AEW succeed, and we should all want to see any pro wrestling company succeed because competition and places for pro wrestlers to work and go makes a better pro wrestling industry. So they're not great numbers, and they are the lowest that the company's ever done. And unfortunately, we've got a couple more weeks left of this, and I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if the numbers got worse, frankly. That's just how it's going to be, unfortunately. But this is the importance of the TBS move next year. Now, one could argue, when it comes to this, is that you look at these ratings and you go, well, they are what they are. Once Dynamite moves back to Wednesdays, once it's back to 8 till 10, everything should go back to normal. If you are AEW, though, you should look at this and say, well, wait a minute. In August, we've got this new AEW Rampage show it's a 1-hour show, but it's going to be on Friday nights and it's going to be from 10 to 11. How is that going to look now? Because we know at this point, this is kind of been a bit of a focus group here. This has kind of been AEW's attempt to see how well would this show draw. Realistically, not amazingly, not great. And Rampage is meant to be an extension of Dynamite. Rampage is meant to be, it's essentially the third hour of Dynamite, but it's on a Friday and it's from 10 to 11 on TNT, eventually TBS. The ratings aren't good, and the numbers aren't good. So it's going to be interesting to see what are AEW's expectations for this. If they're expecting similar numbers to what they're getting for Dynamite on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10, they're not going to get that. They're not. The evidence is there. After 2 hours of watching SmackDown, people might be turned off of watching pro wrestling, or by 10 p.m., they're busy. They're doing other things. Their Friday nights is in full swing, and whatever plans they had, they're completely involved in at that point. They're not sitting down to watch pro wrestling on TNT. So it's going to be interesting to see how that Rampage show draws, or how they set it up. As I mentioned, they're not. Tony Khan, certainly in interviews, is saying, no, it's not going to be like Dark. It's not going to be like Dark Elevation. It's going to feature premier talent. It is going to be taped, but we're going to have a real, full-on show. We're going to have big stars on there. It's certainly going to be interesting when it comes to the ratings on that. So fascinating stuff, and again, I'm sure we'll continue to talk about this, because these discussion points when it comes to Dynamite's ratings, especially in this Friday night time slot and on Fridays, especially when they're preempted, is going to continue. So it's fascinating to see. I do want to talk about this about Andrade. We spoke about this yesterday. There was a report that came exclusively from Wrestling Inc. It came from Raj Giri over at Wrestling Inc. And it spoke about Andrade's contract negotiations with AEW, Impact Wrestling, Ring of Honor, etc. It was an exclusive story from them. And it's discussed the negotiations that Andrade had with AEW, resulting in demands or negotiations of creative control and veto power upon losing. Now, Andrade El Idolo, of course, debuted with AEW this past Friday on the special edition of Dynamite on TNT. Now, it was reported over the weekend by Raj Giri of Wrestling Inc. that Andrade first met with AEW president Tony Khan in Florida the week he was released from his WWE contract in late March. Now, Khan was interested in signing Andrade, given that he did not have the 90-day non-compete clause. However, a deal was not made at the time. Now, Giri noted that the negotiations stalled because of Andrade's demands, which did include wanting creative control and veto power on losing. Now, Andrade also wanted to work for other companies outside of WWE, but this is where, by all accounts, according to himself, Raj Giri, because this is a correction from Raj Giri, he had noted and incorrectly reported that Andrade's final deal had some limited creative control. Now, in an update, Wrestling Inc. has been told that Andrade's deal with AEW does not have any creative control. It was also noted that no one in AEW has creative control on their contracts, as Khan has total control over creative. Now, I believe, I might be wrong here, but I believe that this correction was first reported by PW Insider, who did kind of partially agree with the report from Wrestling Inc., but in addition to that, did kind of dispute the other parts of it, saying there was no compromise, there was no creative control added into the contract. Yes, creative control may have been asked for, but that wasn't in the final deal. Tony Khan controls all of the final say when it comes to creative. It's part of the difference, and part of the things that hopefully is going to help AEW succeed into the future is that there is one guy calling the shots in the same way that Vince McMahon calls the shots in WWE. Tony Khan calls the shots in AEW and has final say over the creative. Now, I spoke about this yesterday, and my opinion kind of really, to be honest, hasn't changed massively, in the sense that, look, if Andrade did demand that or did try and negotiate that, I'm not going to criticize anyone for trying to get a good deal or trying to make good money or trying to better themselves in terms of the contract they get. I do find the whole creative control request by Andrade slightly humorous, because who does the guy thinks he is? Hulk Hogan in the 1980s or 1990s? Certainly not. But it's good to see, frankly, this dispute of the report by PW Insider and the correction by Wrestling Inc. is good to see, frankly, because that's the way it should be. First of all, when it comes to, on so many levels, first of all, when it comes to reporting, pro wrestling journalism and dirt sheets, whatever you want to call them, get so heavily criticized. And look, there are people that report bad information, and there are people that report bad stories. What I don't think we should get into the culture of is obviously of making stuff up. That's unacceptable in any form of the matter. I think I mentioned before, Sean Ross Sapp's doing the best work right now and is the best out there. Why? Because he just does good journalism. But things do go wrong. People do have sources that sometimes they run a story and it doesn't pay off. What is good is people correcting the story. I think that's important as well. And I think it's also important people holding up other people's reporting to scrutiny and accountability. I think that's important in any form of journalism. So I appreciate that. When it comes to the story, what I do appreciate as well is that Tony Khan didn't cave to the creative control demands and the veto power. I appreciate that Tony Khan essentially said, look, I have final say over creative. That's how it's always worked here. That's how it's always going to work here. Nobody has creative control. Even if a Roman Reigns or a John Cena came in, maybe things would change for those guys, but that's not going to happen. Essentially, I have creative control. That's how it needs to stay because that's how the company's going to succeed. You have to draw lines in creative control. Otherwise, the inmates will start running the asylum. Once you get veto power on losing, again, like I said yesterday, the whole veto power on losing, I don't know if I fully buy that because, frankly, doesn't everyone have veto power on losing? Nobody's forcing anyone to lose. If you don't want to go out there and do the job, nobody can force anyone to do anything. You might be blackballed from the business and you'll certainly be fired. But just the fact that you have it in writing, does that make any difference? I don't really know. Maybe that protects you from getting fired in the process. I don't know. But I think everyone, frankly, has veto power. It's just about being a good businessman. But the idea of creative control not being in the contract is a good thing, and it's encouraging to see that Tony Khan realizes that would be a mistake. That would be a mistake, and they can't afford to do that for any talent right now, especially for a growing company. Now, some other things I did want to talk about in regards to Friday's edition of Dynamite. We spoke about, as I mentioned, the whole bad ratings and the bad viewership for Dynamite this past last week. So maybe the hope, I would assume, of Dynamite or AEW rather making all of these announcements for Friday's show is an attempt at saying, see, tune in, we've got all the things announced, you know exactly what you're going to see. Now, one thing announced is AEW Executive Vice President Cody Rhodes. He is scheduled to make a special announcement during this week's Friday Night Dynamite episode on TNT. Now, this is interesting because Cody Rhodes on social media, this is just before I was starting to record this, Cody Rhodes on social media kind of passed the heat. He kind of passed the heat and said that, well, it's not really, it's not a special announcement, and he kind of tried to imply that it's been misconstrued, essentially, because obviously people kind of looked at this a certain way. Cody Rhodes is such a divisive figure right now, but this is what Cody Rhodes had to say on the tweet. He said, quote, "Jeff is a wild man with these tweets, ha. I'd classify this more as a little match announcement. Excited. So maybe not a special announcement, but more so of a Cody match announcement." Look, when it comes to Cody at the moment, I'll be totally honest. I've got my, I don't know if issues is the right word. My certainly is, sometimes Dynamite does feel like the Cody Rhodes show. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The guy's an EVP. The guy is a senior figure in the company. There's nothing wrong with that. And I don't know if Cody Rhodes is really having this reign of terror like people like to say, or like they'd like to put, like Triple H and John Cena, all that kind of stuff. I don't know if that's fair. The issue is when it comes to Cody Rhodes is the guy certainly puts his foot in his mouth a lot. I think he does these media calls and these interviews, and he tries to come across as maybe the smartest person in the room. And sometimes that isn't the case. And there have been numerous times he said that, whether it's focus groups or workshops for interviews, whether it's when he's talking about female wrestling and not every match needs a story. And we have the best television deal in the UK by far. I know they're on ITV and they have a wider base of people to see, but ITV box office no longer exists, and Dynamite still isn't live on television. You have to watch it on Fight TV over here in the UK. Cody Rhodes says a lot of things, and whether or not things actually happen, or like I said, sometimes he wants to be the smartest man in the room. That doesn't mean to be a knock against him. That's just the way that I see that situation. In addition, when it comes to Cody Rhodes, look, it kind of sometimes feels like, as I mentioned, the Cody Rhodes show. AEW or Cody Rhodes or Tony Khan, whoever it is desperate to market Cody Rhodes as a big star, a huge star. He's on the level of The Rock. Cody Rhodes, he's going to have his own reality show. He's on the TBS Go Big show. He's got all of these adverts, and he has a grand entrance, and he has the pyro, and Brandy Rhodes is involved in all this kind of stuff, and it just kind of sometimes feel like, Cody Rhodes is a big star, right? We believe it. Cody Rhodes, you believe Cody Rhodes is a big star. Cody Rhodes is over with the AEW audience. He's a popular guy, but certainly, I don't know, in the last year or so, maybe, there hasn't been a ton of Cody Rhodes stuff that I've really, truly enjoyed, I'll be honest. And there's been examples of Cody Rhodes booking where I just kind of shake my head and I go, who really benefited from that? Last year with Lance Archer at Double or Nothing. Lance Archer, that was a big match that, Cody's a made man. He doesn't need to win all of these big matches anymore. And I know people will say, well, he puts over loads of guys. Cody Rhodes lost this past week on Dynamite, but that wasn't where it mattered. Where it mattered when it comes to Anthony Ogogo was at Double or Nothing. Cody Rhodes won nothing winning that match. And Anthony Ogogo lost a lot losing that match, because when you're a young talent, when you're a less established talent, when it comes to big matches earlier on, you have to win. WWE have proved this when it comes to Braun Strowman. Talent has a moment. And if you miss that moment, it will go and it won't come back. And sometimes with Cody Rhodes, the presentation on Dynamite just kind of feels so forced and so, like this guy, consider him to be a big star. He's on the TBS Go Big Show, and he's got a reality show, and he's got a big entrance, and he's got a manager, and he's got a faction, and he's got a whole factory. He's got the Nightmare family, and he has all these people coming to the ring, and all this kind of stuff, and it just sometimes feels like enough. We get it. Cody Rhodes is an EVP and he's a big deal, but some of the things he says, he's always trying to say the right thing, and like I said, sometimes trying to be the smartest man in the room, or trying to be 2 steps ahead of there's no such thing as a mid-card championship. I didn't consider any championship to be a mid-card championship. The TNT championship is the most important championship in AEW, and all, stuff like that, where it's just like, come on, enough. That's my issue with Cody Rhodes. And look, time will tell what he has announced for this week's Dynamite. He's saying it's a match announcement. Maybe it'll be a rematch for Anthony Ogogo. Who knows? But if it is, he should win. Whether or not he will, time will only tell. Speaking of match announcements, we have an announcement when it comes to Sting and Darby Allin. More segments and matches have been announced for Friday's edition of Dynamite on TNT. Friday's show will feature the first appearance of MJF and the Pinnacle since they lost their Stadium Stampede match to the Inner Circle at Double or Nothing. AEW noted that we will hear from the Pinnacle for the first time since the loss. Last week's show featured the Inner Circle taking their victory lap after their victory at Double or Nothing. Dynamite will also see Lance Archer return to in-ring action with Jake Roberts in his corner. Of course, this will be Archer's first match since losing the TNT Championship match to Miro at Double or Nothing. No word yet on who Archer will be wrestling. Considering they haven't announced his opponent, I can't imagine it'll be someone massive. Finally, AEW has announced that Sting and Darby Allin will make an announcement when it comes to their continued feud with Ethan Page and Scorpio Sky. This was part of I mentioned about things continuing. The Inner Circle and the Pinnacle stuff continued. Sting and Darby Allin with Ethan Page and Scorpio Sky. So, we're not finished with you. We're going to do something else. Because last week's edition of Dynamite saw Ethan Page and Scorpio Sky challenge Darby Allin to face him in a tag team match with anyone but Sting. So Allin and Sting will reveal who his partner is on Friday night. I really didn't like that segment last week, I must say. The fact that people like Ethan Page and Scorpio Sky are scared of a 62-year-old Sting does not make them look good. And I'm not one of those people that said, Sting shouldn't have won at Double or Nothing, all that kind of stuff. It was the right outcome at Double or Nothing, and it was a really fun match. It was a nostalgia match. I thought Sting looked great. And I've been someone that's criticized Sting getting back into the ring at 62 years of age with spinal stenosis, but I thought they did a very good job, and it was obviously very enjoyable. The crowd loved it. But Ethan Page and Scorpio Sky to do a promo saying, well, we would have beat you if you didn't have Sting in your corner. What does that make you look like? We want to face you, but we want to face anyone but the 62-year-old Sting. First of all, we know that they're doing the rematch, but they can't do Sting because he can only do so many matches because he's 62 years old. 2, how does that make you look like? We would have beaten you if it wasn't for a guy in his 60s. If you didn't have the guy in his 60s, but you had anyone else, we would have won. Really? I know you're heels, but man, talk about just killing off any form of credibility that you have. Unbelievable. I mean, it was awful. I mean, it was terrible. And I like Ethan Page and I like Scorpio Sky. I don't really like the tag team. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. But the whole, we would beat you, but you had Sting in your corner, and they tried to frame it as Sting helped him back into the ring after Darby Allin was thrown into the audience. No, it just wasn't good. So who will Darby Allin's partner be? I could see it being Paul White. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Who knows? Who knows who it will be, though? But it's not obviously going to be Sting, and could be anyone. Could be Mark Henry. Could be Paul White. Who knows? Speaking of other matches announced, Christian Cage. We have a match announced for Christian Cage this week on Friday's edition of Dynamite. Cage will go up against Angelico in singles action. Matt Hardy will be in Angelico's corner. Now, the storyline for this match is that Hardy has offered big money to Angelico to take Christian Cage out. AEW President and CEO Tony Khan then booked the first time ever match. To be honest, when it comes to Christian Cage, I'm really enjoying Christian Cage's work on Dynamite. I do like the idea of the whole outwork everyone, and he is legitimately wrestling everyone. One could argue, does he feel as important as he did when he came out of Revolution or when he came out of the Royal Rumble earlier this year? Debatable. I feel that there is something in the works for Christian Cage that we haven't seen yet, and I think that might be a heel turn. I think we could be getting to a situation where, look, Jungle Boy eliminated Christian Cage. Jungle Boy eliminated Christian Cage at the Casino Battle Royale, and afterwards Christian Cage made it a big deal to get in Jungle Boy's face, almost slap him and say, look, make the most of this opportunity, win the AEW World Championship. And I don't think Jungle Boy is going to win the AEW World Championship, so I think we could see a situation where essentially Christian Cage is just furious that this guy not only stole an AEW World Championship in his perception away from him, but then he also failed it. He failed in his pursuit of the AEW Championship and then says, look, that was my opportunity. I worked so hard to come back, and I said I was going to outwork everyone, and you stole that opportunity away from me, and then you failed. You disrespected me, and you failed on top of it. And look, should Christian Cage be the AEW World Champion? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, for a nostalgia pop, maybe. For the comeback that he's had, maybe. But Christian Cage, maybe his best use is having feuds against people like Jungle Boy. Maybe his desire is to say, look, at my age, at this stage of my career, I don't want to be winning the World Championship, but what I do want to do is work and get over talent. I want to make guys. I want to make guys that maybe were struggling to get over before. Now, Jungle Boy isn't struggling to get over by any stretch of the imagination, but in terms of being taken as a serious, credible challenger for a World Championship, establishing him as a main event guy, Christian can do that for him. And I'd be very interested in seeing a Christian Cage versus Jungle Boy feud. As Christian as this just bitter old veteran trying to hold this guy down, I would be very interested in seeing that. So hopefully that's the direction they go in. I don't know if it will. Finally, a match for Nyla Rose has been announced. I mentioned lots of things been announced for Friday's edition of Dynamite on TNT. Nyla Rose versus legit Layla Hirsch is now official for Friday's AEW Dynamite on TNT. The match comes as Rose works toward a title opportunity against AEW World's Women's Champion Britt Baker. Nyla Rose will be in action against Missa Kate on tonight's AEW Dark show, and then of course she'll be in action for Friday's Night Dynamite. I don't know how I really feel about Nyla Rose being the first challenger for Britt Baker. Nyla Rose isn't going to win it. Nyla Rose, I mean, is she now a babyface? Wasn't she a heel before? It kind of talk about flip-flops. The match I want to see, obviously, I think All Out will probably get back to Thunder Rosa versus Britt Baker again, this time for the Women's Championship. I think also a match that I really would like to see is Serena Deeb versus Britt Baker for the AEW World's Women's Championship. I think we are going to get to that point, considering that Serena Deeb just dropped the NWA World's Women's Championships to Camille at the NWA event this past weekend. So hopefully we get towards that. Nothing against Nyla Rose. I'm quite a fan of Nyla Rose. I think the presentation's great. I think the entrance is great. I don't know how it's necessarily going to work with Vicky Guerrero as the manager, considering now she's the manager of Andrade, but I suppose there are things that they can address on Dynamite this week. But look, guys, as always, it's just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all of these AEW news stories we've spoken about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, WWE, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved with the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Get the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.